The Baron's Secret Heir, a Regency love story. Rosewood Manor stood like a ship of stone and glass upon the Hertfordshire hills, its long windows catching every change of English weather. On mornings when the mist lay low across the lawns, the house seemed to float, aloof, ancient, and entirely sure of its importance. Within those walls, 100 lives moved quietly around a single name, Hawthorne, and within that name, a secret waited, tucked behind drawers, folded into blankets, and sleeping in the eyes of a boy who did not yet know who he was. The story begins before that boy could walk. Eleanor Whitcomb was a housemaid at Rosewood in the year 1812-18, with steady hands and a habit of humming when she thought no one listened. She never hummed when the house was full of callers, or when the Countess's sister came in a cloud of perfume and opinions. She hummed in the hour before supper, and in the first wash of daylight when the drawing-room smelled faintly of beeswax and roses. It was on such a morning that Lord Nathaniel Hawthorne, Baron of Rosewood, paused in the doorway, caught by that simple thread of sound. He did not speak at first. He stood, half hidden by the tall drapes, and watched the girl polish the brass edge of the pianoforte, the light laying a path across her cheek. When at last he made himself known, Eleanor startled, then dipped a curtsy that would have pleased the strictest housekeeper. "Forgive me, my lord," she said, breathless. "I did not know." "No apology," he answered, soft. "Stay a moment longer and let me believe this house sings. A small thing, hardly anything at all. But there are ropes and sails rigged on smaller knots. From that hour, the young Baron sought reasons to pass by when Eleanor's work brought her to the family rooms, and Eleanor learned the exact creak of his boots on the painted floor. Their words stayed safe at first: weather, music, the quality of the winter coal. But the eyes of youth make promises long before the mouth dares. It was a bad season for the old Baron, the father, who coughed behind closed doors and signed papers with a hand that shook. Lady Hawthorne, the mother, carried herself like the final word in a family Bible. She had not raised a son to marry for sentiment. Nathaniel knew all of this. He knew the line he guarded, the name he was meant to pass forward. He also knew what it was to stand beneath the ash trees at the edge of the estate, with Eleanor's fingers caught in his, and to believe that sometimes honour was the thing one owed to the truth of the heart, and sometimes to the rules written by others. They were married in secret, in a village church where the curate's cassock smelled faintly of smoke and old books. 2 frightened witnesses signed with dotted hands. There was no carriage waiting, no trousseau. There was a ring and a whispered vow, and the bright, fierce look of 2 young people who could not imagine a world in which they would not be brave enough. For a little while their courage was enough. They lived on stolen hours and notes slipped within ledger books. They believed that some turn of fortune or of Nathaniel's father's health would open a proper door. It was not to be. When the old Baron's cough deepened to a silence that could not be borne, Lady Hawthorne gathered her son with a gaze that saw everything but mercy. "You will marry suitably," she said. "The house will not be handed to scandal." Nathaniel argued until his voice frayed. He swore he would return for Eleanor, swore it upon his father's seal, upon his own title, upon everything that felt sacred. Eleanor listened and said very little, though she kissed the inside of his wrist with a devotion that tried to reach the future and hold it steady. Then the dismissal came, neat, bloodless, and entirely effective. Eleanor was not thrown out. She was simply no longer there. A new placement was found. A trunk was packed. She went without crying in the great hall and without breaking any rules. She kept one thing she was not meant to have: a small baby blanket embroidered with the Hawthorne crest, given to her by Nathaniel in a moment of reckless, foolish hope. She went to ground in a village 20 miles away, and there, beneath a thatch roof that would not keep out the worst of January winds, she brought a son into the world. He was blue about the mouth but strong once the midwife, kind, practical, rubbed him with rough linen. Eleanor named him Henry. She kissed his eyelids and told him a story about ash trees and courage. By spring, she could not lift the pail from the well without shaking. Fever was in her bones in a way that felt more certain than rent. She wrote 2 letters to Rosewood, a neat, careful hand asking for help, and received none. Letters can be diverted by people who think themselves wise, and Lady Hawthorne had many servants loyal to her sense of order. Eleanor understood the answer without seeing it. One grey morning she bundled Henry in the hawthorn blanket, kissed the crown of his head, the scent of milk and something newly made, and walked the miles back to Rosewood, stopping only when her breath turned quick and thin. She came in with the mist. She laid the child upon the stone step beneath the portico. She smoothed his blanket once. Then, with the little strength she had left, she pulled the bell. She hid, though she could not hide well. There was not much body left to hide, and watched the door open. Mr. Thompson, the butler, found the baby. He was not a sentimental man, but fairness lived in him like a faith. "Who leaves a babe like this?" he murmured. And then he saw the crest. "Ah," he said, as one might say upon recognizing handwriting. Eleanor waited until she heard the words they always said, "Fetch the housekeeper," and then she left the only place she had loved. She died 2 days later in a room that smelled of soap, with the midwife's hand in hers, murmuring some version of a blessing. She did not die thinking her child would be sent to a foundling home. Mr. Thompson made certain of that. Henry Hawthorne, though no one called him that, grew up in the margins of a great house. He carried coal scuttles before he learned long division, and learned long division because Mr. Thompson insisted that even a footman might need sums. Henry did not look like the other boys. He carried himself with a straightness that had nothing to do with training. When he smiled, something of the room altered, as though the corners were brighter for a moment, an effect the housemaids named and then laughed at, because naming such things was dangerous. Guests said foolish things. "That lad has the look of a hawthorn about him," one remarked to no one in particular. "The eyes," another said, and then moved on to trifle. "I tell you now that the eyes were grey, steady," though he learned to lower them when it was prudent. In those years, Nathaniel did what a baron is meant to do. He married Lady Amelia Fairhurst. She was gentle and often unwell. They tried for an heir, and the attempt cost her life and the life of the child. After the funeral, Nathaniel closed a door in himself and walked the length of the long gallery as though he meant to wear the carpets to threads. If he thought of Eleanor every day, no one knew. If he kept a portrait of her, it was not a canvas, only a folded paper browned at the edges with the oils of his hands. He remained a gentleman, and lonely. Henry's work changed with his height. Stables, then pantry, then footman's livery. Mr. Thompson, who could not be accused of indulging any boy, ensured that Henry learned to read ledgers, to distinguish a good hand from a lazy one, and to speak in a manner that gave no one cause for complaint. Henry did not ask why such training mattered. He took what came, grateful for bread and the quiet favour of a man who seemed made of oak. It was Henry who stepped forward when the baron's mount went lame on the eastern slope. The horse, spooked by a rabbit, reared, and Nathaniel would have fallen badly if Henry had not moved with the quickness of youth and a fearlessness born of not having much to lose. He caught the bridle and spoke to the animal as one does who thinks more often of gentleness than mastery. "You have him," Nathaniel said afterwards, breathless and oddly shaken. "You have him, and me with him." Henry only touched his forehead and said, "My lord," but the exchange put them on a new footing. Not friends, not equals, no such nonsense, but something like a thread between them that would one day bear weight. And yet, threads attract knives. There was a cousin, Lord Percival Hawthorne. He was handsome in a way that made one suspicious and comfortable in the certainty that the line would pass to him. for Nathaniel had no heir and none likely. Percival understood wills, alliances, the quiet power of a rumour. He noticed Henry and did not care for the steadiness in the boy's gaze. It was Percival who hired a clerk to tidy the old parish register in the village where Eleanor had once lived. It was Percival who paid a curate to forget a marriage signed in smoke-scented ink. He did not fear ghosts, but he feared records that might stand up in law. Percival also had allies among the idle young men of the county, boys who enjoyed a game. It is surprising what can be arranged with a few coins and a hint. A cluster of silver spoons gone missing, a stable-master willing to swear, a footman whose drawer produces the spoons as if they had walked there by themselves. This is a detail worth remembering. Henry, meanwhile, discovered other truths by accident. He was tasked one rain-soaked evening with carrying a stack of old books from the late Amelia's sitting room to the Baron's study. The lower drawer of the desk, often locked, slid open under his weight. He looked away at once. He understood the law of drawers, but paper shifted, and a small ring rolled to the lip. It was a signet ring, heavy, bearing the hawthorn crest, 3 hawthorn berries and a penned hound. He had seen that crest before. He had seen it every night when the small blanket, washed and carefully folded, lay beneath his head. Mr. Thompson had given it to him at 12, long after the danger of questions had passed, and had said only, "Keep this." It belonged to the home that did not know it wanted you. Henry put the ring back. He closed the drawer. He carried the books, all of them, and then, shaking in a way he did not show, went to the small room under the eaves and spread his blanket and the memory of the ring side by side on the narrow bed. He did not sleep much. He did not ask Mr. Thompson at once. He waited 2 days, then found the butler in the still room measuring out a cordial for a guest with more appetite than restraint. "Sir," Henry said low, "if a child came wrapped in a particular blanket, and if that blanket bore the hawthorn crest—" Mr. Thompson lifted his head. He had planned this moment for years and dreaded it as one dreads the last page of a book one loves. "Finish your thought, Henry," he said. "If such a child were found on the steps, to whom would he belong?" "To the mercy of the house," Mr. Thompson answered. He set down the glass. "And to the truth, when the truth could be born. Can it be born now?" Mr. Thompson looked at the boys, no longer a boy's, not quite, and saw the grey eyes calm and pale like a winter river. "Yes," he said. "Yes, I think it can." He told Henry what he knew. A misty morning, a bell pulled by a hand that could not linger, a child wrapped with greater care than the wealthy sometimes give their own, a name Eleanor Whitcomb, once a maid, a suspicion more than a fact, carried quietly because sometimes kindness is to give the world time to catch up to what is right. Henry listened and did not speak for a while. When he did, his voice had the sound of a decision in it. "Then I must ask him," he said. "Ask, if you must," Mr. Thompson answered. "But do not ask without proof. Memory is slippery, and those who fear it will make a sport of your loss. Proof, then." Henry did not begin with the Baron. He began with the laundry maid who remembered which girls had left Rosewood suddenly, and with the stable boy, older than sense, who had once taken a note to the village curate and been rewarded with a slice of pie. He walked to that same village on his Sunday afternoon and found the church door open, as most village church doors blessedly are. The register was there, neat in its binding, but Henry could tell where a page had been lifted. Old paper leaves a ghost of itself behind. He thought for a moment that this ghost would be the end of it. Then the curate's housekeeper, a woman with sharp elbows and a heart that had forgiven worse than this, watched him, watching the book. "You're not the first to come," she said, "and you're the first who looked sorry when you saw it." "Who was the other?" Henry asked, careful. "A gentleman with a ring that flashed when he turned his hand," she answered. "Looked like a man who flourishes his name when he writes it." "Percival," Always Percival. If the register had been cut, the world had not been emptied of witnesses. The housekeeper remembered the night a young curate had married a lady's son to a maid. She remembered the two who signed for it, an old gardener whose hand made its mark like a plough, and a kitchen maid with a name as plain as the day she worked through. She remembered the maid's face more than anything, very young, very determined. She told Henry something else as well. The curate, nervy and guilt-ridden, had made a private copy of the entry the night he feared it might be challenged. He had written out the names and left the scrap in a book of sermons no one had wanted since 1799. The housekeeper, not trusting fate, had taken the scrap for herself and tucked it into the lining of a hat she wore to no occasion but funerals. Men, she said, are careless with small salvations. She fetched the hat. She picked at the lining with patient fingers. She drew forth a paper creased to softness and put it in Henry's hand. He read the names there. Nathaniel Hawthorne, Eleanor Whitcomb. He knew then, not with his mind, which had been ready, but with a quiet chamber behind the ribs. He thanked the woman. He folded the paper in his inner pocket and felt taller because he carried it. He went back to Rosewood with proof. He would have gone to the Baron that night if not for Percival, who had his own clocks. Henry was summoned, not by the Baron, but by authority that mimicked his. The Spoons, you recall, had walked. They walked directly to Henry's small drawer where Percival's boy placed them, then stood as witness with handsome lies on his tongue. It was done very neatly. Henry found himself before the steward, Mr. Thompson, and Percival. The latter wore a look of pleasant disappointment. "I'm afraid," Percival said, "we must keep the household clean of dishonour." Mr. Thompson said nothing, but something changed about his mouth, as if patience had finally met its match. "Let the Baron hear this," Mr. Thompson said. "He will judge better than a cousin." But Percival had timed his play for the hour when Nathaniel rode to visit a tenant afield and would not return until dark. He smiled. "We cannot trouble my cousin with trifles, send the boy away before dinner." Quietly, Henry stood very still. He looked at Mr. Thompson and saw in the older man's face a sorrow that was almost rage. "No," Henry said. It was a simple word, but it lifted something in the room. "No, not quietly. Not this time." He walked out and waited. He waited in the long gallery where the family portraits hung, where Nathaniel's voice carried the miles he had ridden. Percival stepped forward, always a step too close. "A petty theft, cousin." Easily disposed of, Henry did not speak to Percival. He took the folded paper from his pocket and placed it on a small table between himself and the Baron. He laid the hawthorn blanket beside it, the crest bright from careful washings. He did not touch the ring. That would be presumption. He looked at Nathaniel and spoke for the first time without the shield of "my lord." "My name is Henry," he said. "I was left at your door in this blanket. I was told I belonged to the mercy of this house and to the truth when it could be born. Sir," and here his voice lowered, not with fear but with reverence, "I believe I am your son." Silence is not always empty. Sometimes it is a seat made ready for someone to sit and say what is most necessary. Nathaniel looked at the paper and did not yet touch it. He looked at the blanket, the work of a careful woman who had pressed his crest into cloth when she believed it would mean something. Then he looked at Henry, and whatever doubt had been put in him by duty or grief loosened its hold. He said Eleanor's name, as if he had been saving it. "Where did you get this?" His glove fell to the floor. He didn't seem to notice. He reached at last for the paper, and when he read the names, the light in the gallery performed some trick, or his eyes did. Percival laughed lightly, the wrong music in the wrong room. "A servant's tale," he said. "Conjured. Paid witnesses are easily found. A torn register proves nothing." Nathaniel turned then, slow, like a man remembering how to be dangerous. He rang a bell that did not often ring. He did not speak to Percival. He asked Mr. Thompson for the old gardener if he lived, and the kitchen maid if she could be found. He asked for the curate's housekeeper by name, for Nathaniel kept names like a careful farmer keeps tools, oiled and in order. They came one by one, not that day, but the next and the next. The gardener's hand, now a claw, matched the mark. The kitchen maid produced a ribbon Eleanor had given her that same night, still kept, a foolish keepsake made suddenly noble. The curate's housekeeper told her story, like a woman who had been waiting for someone worthy to tell it to. Percival attempted other games, letters to lawyers, mutterings in the club, but a tide had turned. He had the look of a man told the sea is no longer in the habit of waiting for his instructions. None of this touched the moment that mattered. It happened late, after the house had gone quiet with the round, silver sleep of wealth. Nathaniel came to the small sitting room he used when he could not bear the larger ones. Henry stood when he entered and would have bowed, but Nathaniel crossed the room and put his hand to the side of his son's face. "You look like her around the mouth," he said, and then lower, as if apology were something privately said. "Forgive my cowardice. I loved her. Others decide what love was worth. There is no honour in that. I have lived longer than I intended to meet this night and try to make it right." Henry did not step back from the hand. He had imagined this moment, and all his imaginings had been less human than this. "If you will have me as I am," he said, "I will not be found wanting." Nathaniel half turned, as if to call the room itself to witness. "As you are is all I ever should have asked for." The rest was both simple and complicated, as the truest things tend to be. There were papers to sign and whispers to outlast, and a cousin to send to a distant property where the soil was thin, and so it turned out, was his luck. There were older servants who accepted the change at once, and younger ones who could not understand why anyone had ever doubted it. There was a town to convince, and then there was no town to convince because they had already convinced themselves. "Of course," they said, "we always thought so." Nathaniel brought two things out of hiding. The first was a letter, his letter to Eleanor. "No force of society shall tear you from me." Now decades old and foolish in its certainty, and yet the only true thing he had said at the time. The second was a small sketch of Eleanor, charcoal, the line of her jaw once kept in a drawer and now hung at Henry's insistence, at the head of the long gallery. Nathaniel stood before it sometimes with his mouth set, not in sorrow, but in something like thanks. "We are late," he said to the drawing, "but present." Mr. Thompson allowed himself, at last, the smallest confession. "I have prayed," he told Henry, "for the day I could set down a burden I was proud to carry but never meant to keep." Henry took to his new lessons with the same care he had given a well-polished banister. He learned tenants' names, the history of a pond dug for reasons now forgotten, the price of grain when the river ran low. He did not forget where he came from. He visited the still room and the stables and listened to the cook's complaints, because the health of the house can be measured by whether the cook complains in soprano or alto. On a morning warm enough to soften the edges of things, Nathaniel and Henry rode out together. The horses liked each other. The men did too, which is rarer. They paused at the ash trees on the edge of the estate. Nathaniel looked at the place where he had once been young and brave, and then, in the same hour, young and not brave enough. "I did not keep my promise," he said, "but perhaps I can keep another. To be your father, to remember her without fear, to leave this place better than I received it." Henry's answer was not long. "We will. The work of restoration is not a single act, it is a series. A repaired roof ridge, a farmer's debt forgiven with conditions that made the forgiveness useful, a portrait returned to light, a man speaking the name of the woman he loved without flinching. It is a cousin sent away, and more importantly, a son recognized. In time, people stopped saying the foundling and started saying Mr. Henry Hawthorne. In time, Nathaniel's hair went white in a way that made his eyes look younger. In time, Henry stood where his father had stood at the top of the long stairs when callers arrived and thought not of power, but of stewardship, a word learned in the stables, carefully applied to land and people both. One autumn, when the hedgerows burned with berries and the low sun made the lake into a sheet of hammered gold, Henry walked alone to the village church where pages had once been cut. He did not go to scold books. He went to leave a small silver box upon the altar. Within lay a copy of the paper given him by the housekeeper, now properly sealed and witnessed, and a line in his hand. For the sake of truth, which, when kept, will not tarnish. He did not sign it. He did not need to. He went next to a grave that had no name and no headstone, only a place the midwife had once told the curate to keep. He laid his hand to the earth and spoke aloud because some debts are paid best with the voice. "Mother," he said, "we are safe." He returned to Rosewood by the lower path, the one Eleanor had once walked. He passed the bell pull and laughed, softly, without bitterness, at the thought that some doors must be rung twice, once by a desperate girl, and once by a son come home. At supper, Nathaniel poured 2 small glasses of port and held his up. "To Eleanor," he said. "To Eleanor," Henry answered. They drank in a room that had seemed too much silence and not enough honest joy. And the house, if a house can be said to have a soul, was easy at last. Rosewood still stands. People arrive and leave and tell stories that make them feel clever at the edge of the gravel. The truth does not bristle when all the talking begins. It lies quiet and clear, the way a pond lies when wind kindnesses it. The servant's child became the heir, and a baron learned that love, improperly set aside, will return not to scold, but to finish what it began. If you walk the long gallery in the hour after dawn, you will see a portrait that is hardly more than charcoal, and you will know the face before you read the name beneath. If you pass on to the last window and look out over the ash trees, you may catch 2 riders crossing the lower field, a man whose hair has gone to winter, and another whose strength is all summer. They will stop beneath the trees, say very little, and then go on, which is the only proper thing to do when, after a long absence, the heart has found its address. And the house will hold them both. The end. Every store. Pray accept my gratitude, dear viewer, for accompanying us through this tale. I trust it has brought you some measure of delight. If the story has pleased you, kindly grace us with your thoughts and do subscribe to this channel that you may be promptly notified when further romances and adventures are unveiled. Until our next meeting, I remain most obliged to you.